Hello everybody, this is Money Mom. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to our history series. We only have a few weeks left. Today I'm going to talk about a decade I remember quite well, the 1970s, the economy in the 1970s. Let's get started. I was born in 65, but I started kindergarten in 1970. Now how I remember the 70s is quite different than what I read, and I was kind of really surprised. Now my husband is 7 years older than me, so he remembers things a little bit differently. I remember, and this, I'm just going to tell you how I remember the 70s. I'm going to tell you what I've learned. I remember the 70s where a lot of the mothers in our neighborhood were stay-at-home moms. My dad made a good, healthy income. He was a truck driver and a teamster. I remember the 70s were big into having a lot of different, you had pensions, and then also with that, a lot of benefits from your work. And so it was kind of a good time that way, and I remember us being quite comfortable throughout most of the 1970s. But according to my research, one of the things that happened was rising oil prices and inflation. They said in the 1970s, inflation rates hit 20%. Now that's quite large. Also, there were job losses during that time, so you had higher unemployment, and the oil prices were going up. So things were getting kind of tight. Now, I don't remember that much when I was younger. I do, however, remember some of these types of things, and maybe it just hit where I lived a little bit later. Later 1970s and early 80s, because I remember my parents buying a house, and if I can remember correctly, the interest rate on that house was like 13%. And so the house payment was higher. And I do remember that, and that was in the late 1970s, because we moved in, my dad wanted to live out in the country. And so you guys know I'm from the Twin Cities. We moved, I'm from Woodbury. That's where I mostly grew up, if any of you have ever heard of it. And then for 4 years, we lived in Stillwater, Minnesota, which is, I don't know if you would call it a suburb of the Twin Cities, but when we moved there, we lived out in the country. But I remember the interest rate on that house being higher, and that was in the late 1970s, like 79. And so that's what I mostly remember. But according to what I read, it was higher oil prices, inflation, recession, unemployment. The economy started to kind of slow down. We started off good, but that's what was happening during the 1970s. And you know what is interesting is I do remember something. I remember in 1976, and this is, so I was in 6th grade at the time. I used to wear dresses all the time to school. And so my parents said, hey, maybe you should start wearing jeans. A lot of the girls your age are wearing jeans. And I remember my parents taking me to go clothes shopping, and I think it was JCPenney's or Sears. The jeans, and this is in 76, they cost $24 for one of the pair and $22 for the other. I remember that. And I thought that was a lot back then. And you know what's interesting is you can nowadays you can go get a pair of jeans for $22 or $24. And so I don't know if that was because of inflation or because, better quality, higher quality items. I'm not sure, but I remember that. I remember that groceries and certain items and electronics and TVs were higher costs. So you bought quality, paid for what you had, and you took good care of it, but you just didn't have as much. We had like a couple pair of pants. We might have had 5 shirts, 2 pair of shoes. You just didn't have a lot. I remember that. But we did okay in the 70s, but then it did start to affect my dad's job towards the end of the 70s, where there were times where he got laid off, and that's why he would work hard on saving money or pick up night shifts and do what he had to do during that time when the inflation was going up higher, oil prices were going higher, and all of that. But I remember the beginning, the early 70s through the mid. For me, I don't remember all this unemployment and gas. I don't know. You guys may have a different experience. It may be because of where I grew up, maybe because I was young and I just didn't know. But the 70s for me was a wonderful, who would ever think I'd say this? The 1970s were the good old days. I loved the music. I loved the fashion. I know it's scary to think this, guys, but I used to wear tube tops and halter tops. I promise I won't do that on the channel. That would scare all my subscribers away. You would all unsubscribe and block me. But anyway, I just remember the 70s being a really fun time. But maybe I was just too young to remember all this other stuff. I wanted to ask you guys about that. I know supposedly the economy was getting weaker in the 70s, but I just remember that in the early 80s, like I mentioned. What do you remember about the 1970s? pertaining to the economy. Do you kind of feel like me, like this seemed to be more the late 70s? If you grew up in the 70s, what was it like for you during that time? I always love to hear from you. And next week, maybe I'll give myself like a mullet or back comb my hair and do my hair and makeup like the 80s. And I'm going to do a video on the economy during the 1980s next week. That's all for now. Let me know what you think of this video. I love you, appreciate you, and like always, I'll see you on the next video. Bye-bye.